What if everything you believed about old Hollywood beauty was carefully manufactured? What if the most flawless faces on screen were hiding something studios refused to let you see? Behind the soft lighting and perfect makeup were secrets: facial hair, hidden shadows, details erased frame by frame. Tonight, we're uncovering 15 actresses whose image was controlled down to the smallest detail. And once you see it, you won't look at classic Hollywood the same way again. Marilyn Monroe. This is where the illusion becomes almost unbelievable. Because the glow you associate with Marilyn Monroe, that soft, luminous radiance, wasn't just lighting, it was interaction. Monroe had fine facial hair, cedar like everyone else, but instead of eliminating it entirely, Hollywood learned something unexpected. It could be used. Light would hit the tiny hairs on her face and scatter, creating that signature glow audiences couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore. It made her look almost unreal, like she was glowing from within. But don't mistake that for acceptance. This wasn't about embracing reality. It was about controlling it in a different way, weaponizing something natural and turning it into something mythic, but only under strict, calculated conditions. Because if the lighting shifted, even slightly, the effect disappeared. And what remained was something the studio didn't want seen. So every angle was tested, every shadow adjusted, every scene carefully constructed to maintain that illusion of effortless radiance. What you saw wasn't accidental. It was engineered perfection built on something no one was ever supposed to notice. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Audrey Hepburn is often remembered as the definition of elegance. Clean, delicate, almost impossibly refined. Her image feels effortless, untouched, natural. But that feeling is exactly what makes the illusion so effective. Because what you're seeing isn't pure reality, it's carefully constructed simplicity. In truth, she had the same natural features as anyone else, including fine facial hair that could become visible under certain lighting conditions. And in a system that rejected even the smallest imperfection, that detail couldn't be ignored. It had to be managed before it ever reached the screen. Lighting played a critical role. Soft, diffused setups were designed to maintain her signature smooth appearance. Shadows were minimized. Highlights were controlled. The goal wasn't to enhance. It was to remove, to reduce anything that might break the illusion of flawless skin. Makeup followed the same philosophy. It wasn't heavy or dramatic. It was precise. Subtle layers applied with intention and are designed not to transform her, but to quietly erase what shouldn't be seen. Every close-up was calculated to preserve that sense of purity audiences associated with her image. What makes Hepburn's case unique is how invisible the manipulation feels. Unlike more dramatic transformations, hers was about restraint, removing just enough reality to create something idealized without ever appearing artificial. And that's where the illusion becomes most powerful, because it feels honest, it feels untouched, but it isn't. It's reality. Edited so perfectly, you never question it. Vivien Leigh. On screen she looked untouchable. Perfect skin, perfect symmetry, a face built for eternity but stepped just outside the illusion and the reality shifts. Like many actresses of her time, Vivien Leigh had natural facial hair, fine, subtle, but visible under unforgiving light. And that was unacceptable in an industry obsessed with perfection. So the system adapted. Soft focus lenses blurred texture. Key lights were angled to flatten shadows. Makeup wasn't just beauty, it was camouflage. Every close-up was calculated, every frame controlled. What you were seeing wasn't just a performance, it was engineering. Directors understood something critical. The camera didn't forgive, it revealed. And even the faintest detail could break the illusion audiences were conditioned to believe. So nothing was left to chance. Retakes were endless. Angles were precise. Lighting became a weapon. Because in old Hollywood, even something as human as peach fuzz could threaten everything. And the illusion wasn't optional. It was survival. Elizabeth Taylor. Her eyes became legend. Her presence undeniable. But look closer, beyond the spectacle of Cleopatra, and you begin to see the machinery behind the image. Elizabeth Taylor, like many others, had natural facial hair. Subtle, yes. But under the intensity of Technicolor and high-budget lighting, nothing stayed subtle for long. Because Technicolor didn't soften reality, it intensified it. Every detail became sharper, every imperfection more visible, and that created a new kind of pressure, one that required even greater control. So the solution wasn't simple removal, it was domination. Heavy makeup concealed texture. Layers were built to create the illusion of flawless skin. Lighting flattened the surface, eliminating shadows that might reveal anything beneath. Every frame was designed, not captured. And then came the contradiction. The same features that made her iconic, thick lashes, bold brows, dramatic presence, were exaggerated, pushed forward, made unforgettable. While anything that challenged perfection was erased completely, it wasn't balance, it was selection. Because in a production that cost millions, even the smallest imperfection wasn't just a detail, it was a risk, a threat to the image, a crack in the illusion. And in Hollywood, cracks were never allowed to show. Jean Harlow's image was built on one thing, perfection that felt effortless. Platinum blonde hair, radiant skin, a presence that seemed almost too polished to be real, and in many ways it wasn't, because beneath that polished surface was the same reality every actress faced. Natural skin texture, fine facial hair, and details the camera could easily expose, especially under the harsh lighting conditions of early sound cinema, where film stock was far less forgiving. It didn't soften reality, it sharpened it. So the studio adapted. Bright lighting was diffused to reduce sharpness. Filters softened the image before it reached the audience. Makeup was layered carefully, smoothing the surface of her skin while hiding anything that might appear under intense light. Angles were chosen deliberately, minimizing shadow and eliminating depth that could reveal texture. But the most revealing part isn't what was hidden, it's how much effort it took to hide it. Because Harlow's look wasn't static, it wasn't something achieved once and maintained. It was constantly corrected. Scene required adjustment. Every frame demanded refinement, because the technology of the time made exposure inevitable, and Hollywood refused to let that happen. So perfection became a process, continuous, controlled, unforgiving. Because in an industry built on illusion, visibility wasn't truth, it was a threat. Hedy Lamarr. They called her the most beautiful woman in the world. But beauty in Hollywood was never natural. It was controlled. However, Hedy Lamarr had delicate facial hair like anyone else. The difference? The camera couldn't be allowed to see it. Directors knew harsh lighting would reveal everything. Texture, pores, even the faintest hair. So they eliminated it. Diffusion filters softened her image. Light wrapped around her face instead of exposing it. The result felt almost unreal, like she existed in a carefully designed illusion rather than reality. But this wasn't accidental. It was strategy. Every shot was tested, adjusted, refined, because one wrong highlight could undo the entire image. And in a system built on perfection, that risk was unacceptable. What makes this more unsettling is how invisible the process became. Audiences didn't see the effort. They saw magic. But it wasn't magic. It was control. Precise, calculated, and relentless. Because in this system, reality wasn't enhanced. It was erased. Ingrid Bergman. Her face in Casablanca is one of the most carefully lit images in film history. It was soft, glowing, almost ethereal. But that glow wasn't accidental. It was strategic. Ingrid Bergman, known for her natural beauty, still existed within a system that demanded perfection beyond reality. Like every actress of the era, she had fine facial hair. Completely normal. Completely human? But the camera didn't recognize normal. It exaggerated it. Under strong lighting, even the smallest detail could become visible. And visibility was the problem Hollywood refused to tolerate. So lighting became the solution. A specialized diffusion technique was used to soften her features, blur imperfections, and create that iconic halo effect around her face. It didn't just hide detail. It replaced it with something smoother, calmer, more controlled. The effect feels natural. That's the illusion. Because what you're seeing isn't untouched beauty. It's engineered softness, a version of reality that has been carefully reduced until it fits the standard audiences expect. Even her most intimate close-ups were calculated. Angles were selected to minimize exposure. Shadows were eliminated before they could reveal anything real. Every frame was controlled before it was ever captured, because even when Hollywood allowed natural beauty, it was never truly natural. It was curated, refined, controlled down to the smallest detail, and once you understand that, the image changes, because nothing about it was ever left to chance. Clara Bow. Clara Bow was the original It girl, the face of an era, the embodiment of youthful, untamed energy that defined the late silent film period. She wasn't just a star, she was a phenomenon. But even she wasn't immune to the industry's growing obsession with perfection. In a time before advanced lighting techniques and modern cosmetics, the camera was unpredictable. Film stock reacted harshly to light, exaggerating contrast, and revealing details that might otherwise go unnoticed, including facial hair. Bow, like many early actresses, had natural features that didn't always translate cleanly on screen. Fine facial hair, uneven texture, shifting shadows. These weren't flaws in real life, but under the lens, they became visible in ways that couldn't be ignored. And this is where something important happened. The industry began to adapt, not gradually but urgently. Lighting techniques evolved to control exposure. Makeup became more strategic, designed not just for beauty, but for correction. The foundation of Hollywood's illusion machine was being built in real time, and Bow was right in the middle of it. What makes her story different is that it happened at the beginning, before the system was perfected, before the illusion became seamless. Which means, in her films, you can still see the edges, the inconsistencies, the moments where reality slips through. And those moments reveal something deeper, because what Hollywood would later perfect started here. Perfection wasn't natural. It was learned, built, and enforced, frame by frame from the very beginning. Sophia Loren. Here's where the illusion cracks. Sophia Loren didn't always play by Hollywood's rules. While others erased every trace of facial hair, she sometimes allowed a more natural look to exist on screen. And that subtle defiance changed everything. Yes, she had fine facial hair, completely normal, completely human, but instead of burying it under layers of artificial perfection, her image occasionally leaned into authenticity. The lighting wasn't always designed to erase, it revealed. And that difference, however small, made her presence feel more real than most. But even then, the system never fully let go. Expectations were still there. The pressure to appear flawless didn't disappear. It lingered in every frame, every close-up, every decision behind the camera. So what you're seeing isn't total freedom. It's controlled authenticity, a version of reality that still fits within the boundaries of illusion. Because even when Hollywood allowed imperfection, it only allowed just enough to feel believable. Greta Garbo. She was never meant to feel real. That was the point. Greta Garbo existed on screen like something distant, untouchable, almost unreal. But that distance wasn't accidental. It was constructed with precision, layer by layer, frame by frame. Garbo, like others, had natural facial texture and fine hair, completely normal, completely human. But Hollywood understood something critical. If audiences saw too much, the illusion would break. So instead of fighting those details directly, the system did something more effective. It erased them entirely. Heavy diffusion filters softened every line until her face seemed to glow without origin. Shadows were deepened in just the right places to hide detail, while highlights were controlled to prevent texture from ever emerging. The result wasn't just beauty, it was abstraction. Her face became less human, more symbol. And that's where the illusion becomes powerful, because the closer you think you're getting, the less you're actually seeing. Every close-up feels intimate, but it's carefully restricted. You're not seeing Garbo. You're seeing a version of her that has been filtered, reduced, and perfected beyond recognition. She wasn't just filmed. She was redesigned through light. And in that process, reality didn't just disappear. It was replaced by something more controlled, more distant, and ultimately more deceptive. Because Garbo wasn't meant to be understood, she was meant to be worshipped. Joan Crawford control. That was the obsession. And no one understood it better than Joan Crawford. Every inch of her image was managed. Every angle, every shadow, every detail, including facial hair. In an era where high definition didn't exist, lighting did the heavy lifting. But Crawford went further. Grooming routines were intense, relentless, waxing, shaving. Whatever it took to maintain the illusion of absolute sharpness. Because for her, perfection wasn't optional, it was discipline. Her signature look, the defined jawline, the sculpted face, wasn't just genetics. It was maintenance, daily, controlled, enforced. Because the camera didn't just capture, it exposed, and exposure was the threat. So everything was reduced to control. Angles minimized risk. Shadows were eliminated. Texture was softened before it could even register. What you saw wasn't just a performance, it was a surface, carefully maintained and constantly protected. Because in Crawford's world, reality didn't belong on screen. Only perfection did. She didn't just become a star. She was transformed into one. Bette Davis never fit the traditional mold of Hollywood beauty. And that's exactly why the system worked so hard to reshape her. Her face had character, intensity, and detail. It wasn't soft. It wasn't passive. It demanded attention. Yes, but in an industry obsessed with smooth perfection, detail wasn't an asset. It was a liability. Like others, she had natural facial hair. Fine, barely visible in everyday life, but amplified under studio lighting. And that was enough to become a problem. Because the camera didn't just capture, it exaggerated. It pulled forward what the human eye might ignore. It turned subtle texture into visible imperfection. And in Hollywood, imperfection couldn't exist. So the solution became transformation. Makeup artists didn't just enhance her features, they reshaped them. Contouring carved structure into her face, while powder softened what the camera might expose. Lighting was adjusted constantly, reducing shadows that could reveal texture. Close-ups were carefully staged, with angles chosen not for realism, but for control. Every shot became a calculated decision. But here's what makes Davis different. She didn't rely on illusion alone. She overpowered it. Her performances were so intense, so commanding, that they redirected the audience's focus. You weren't looking at her skin. You were locked into her eyes, her voice, her presence. She turned attention into a shield. And yet, behind that power, the system was still working, still adjusting, still hiding. Because even someone as strong as Bette Davis couldn't escape it completely. Hollywood didn't allow exceptions. It demanded perfection from everyone, whether it was real or not. Rita Hayworth is one of the clearest examples of how far studios would go to construct perfection, and that included managing facial and body hair with absolute precision. Electrolysis reshaped her hairline. Grooming routines were strict, controlled, and ongoing. Because the natural version of her didn't fit the image Hollywood wanted to sell. The transformation wasn't subtle, it was systematic. Then came the lighting. Soft, glowing, carefully engineered to erase anything human. Every close-up was designed to maintain the illusion. Every shadow was adjusted to protect it. By the time she appeared on screen, she wasn't just Rita Hayworth. She was the final product of a system that didn't discover beauty. It manufactured it. And once you understand that, the image changes. Because what looks effortless was built, controlled, and never allowed to break. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich didn't just understand the camera. She controlled it. In an era where most actors depended on directors and cinematographers, she took command of her own image with almost obsessive precision. And that included how her face appeared under light, down to the smallest, most revealing details. Like many actresses of her time, she had natural facial hair, fine, subtle, and completely human. But Dietrich refused to let the camera expose anything she didn't approve of. She understood something others learned later. The camera doesn't just capture truth, it magnifies it. And if left uncontrolled, it could reveal everything. So she took control of the variables. She demanded specific lighting setups that would sculpt her face while hiding texture. High-key lights were positioned to illuminate her cheekbones, while shadows were placed strategically to erase anything beneath the surface. Nothing was accidental. Every beam of light had a purpose. She also insisted on heavy diffusion filters, softening her appearance until her skin looked almost unreal. Not just smooth, perfectly constructed. The goal wasn't beauty. It was authority over how beauty was defined. What makes Dietrich different is that she wasn't just shaped by the system. She mastered it. She turned it into a tool. So every frame featuring her became a negotiation between what existed and what was allowed to be seen. And once you realize that, her image shifts. Because it wasn't effortless, it was controlled completely and intentionally. Ava Gardner. She was called the most beautiful animal in the world. Raw, magnetic, untamed. But even Ava Gardner wasn't allowed to be natural. Not completely. Because under the harsh, unforgiving lights of a studio set, even the smallest detail could betray the illusion. Like many actresses of her era, she had fine facial hair, barely visible in real life, but amplified under intense lighting. And that was enough to trigger intervention. Cinematographers adjusted angles obsessively. Shadows were softened. Highlights were controlled with almost surgical precision. Because one wrong beam of light could expose what the studio spent years trying to hide. But what makes this more unsettling isn't the detail itself. It's the reaction to it. The idea that something so ordinary, so human, had to be erased completely. Not once, not occasionally, but constantly. Frame by frame. Shot by shot. Gardner's beauty felt effortless. That was the illusion. In reality, it was monitored, corrected, and protected at all times. Because the camera wasn't just recording her, it was testing her, looking for flaws, magnifying them, threatening to reveal them. So the system stayed ahead of it, always adjusting, always controlling. Because in old Hollywood, perfection wasn't natural, it was defended. What you've seen tonight isn't just about beauty, it's about control. Old Hollywood didn't discover perfection. It manufactured it, protected it, and hid anything that didn't fit the illusion. And once you realize that, every flawless face starts to look different. So the question is, how much of what we see today is real? And how much is still carefully constructed?